Okay. I think we'll go ahead and get a start here. All right. Thank you, everyone. Sorry for the technical difficulties. This session will be recorded, and so we will make sure to get a copy out as soon as possible. I do want to welcome everyone out. This is a really exciting opportunity, something that we haven't done before as part of the NEUP program, and so I'm really excited to have Andrew Bollinger present this to you and to have a question and answer today. For everyone's awareness, this session is being recorded. If you do not consent to being recorded, please do drop off this call and catch the recording after this is posted. We will be having a 15 to 20 minute presentation by Andrew Bollinger, and then we will have a question and answer session afterward. That question and answer session will take questions, both live questions on an open mic format, and we'll also take questions by the chat. So whichever way you're most comfortable asking your questions, please go ahead and do that when we open that time frame. With that, I will turn the time over to Andrew Bollinger. Andrew is our program manager for University Fuel Services and many of the infrastructure activities that happen in the NEUP program, and he'll be presenting the opportunities today. Andrew, take it away.
All right, thank you. So first, I'd like to welcome everyone who's joined us today. As Drew has stated before, this is an informational webinar for the two new infrastructure-related FOAs for fiscal year 2024. The first FOA we'll probably talk about, or we will talk about, is the Reactor Sharing and Outreach, and the second funding opportunity is called Infrastructure Revitalization. I'll go over the basic kind of like references to what each of them mean, and we'll start out with reactor sharing and then move on to infrastructure revitalization next. So if you want to move, so on slide 2, we're going to start off with the top one there, which is DEFOA 3041, and then we'll move on to 3042. Essentially, both of these funding opportunities are intended to reinvigorate our existing nuclear science and engineering and technologies through the university programs. All right, so starting out. So with reactor sharing and outreach, this funding opportunity might sound similar to a previous one from many years ago that ended in the mid-2000s. And back then and now today, is that universities with research reactors are intending to share their capabilities and resources across other institutions and the public. Essentially, we want to strengthen nuclear science, engineering, and technology in non-reactor owning institutions like other colleges and universities. We also want to create opportunities with faculty and students. So a lot of collaborative chances with different institutions if in your state or across state lines. And we want to improve public awareness and understanding of nuclear science and technology through these outreach opportunities. So that may include things like tours or kind of a public day, something like that. And then finally, we really want to engage with underrepresented communities and to promote them in the nuclear fields and to educate and recruit the next generation of workforce of scientists, engineers, technicians, etc. So to kind of touch on what I mean by underrepresented communities and disadvantaged communities, I'm actually going to pass it to Denise Freeman, who is on the call today, and she will go over the next slide.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Thumbs up? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So good afternoon. I'm Denise Freeman, and I'm the Environmental Justice Senior Advisor for the Office of Nuclear Energy. Now, as Andrew just mentioned on the previous slide, one of the major objectives of both of these programs is to engage with underrepresented and disadvantaged communities. And then you ask me, like, why is that important, right? Historically, minorities and women have been vastly underrepresented in the STEM fields that drive the energy sector. However, over the last decade, the STEM workforce has gradually diversified, and we've seen an increase from these underrepresented communities, which is good news. For example, Hispanic workers represented 15% of the total STEM workforce. Asian and African American workers were 10% and 9% respectively. And American Indians and Alaska Natives together make up less than 1% of the US population and the STEM workforce. This is in 2021 and according to the National Science Foundation. So here at the Office of Nuclear Energy, we recognize the need to increase the participation of diverse communities in the conversation around nuclear energy. We want to do our part. And we're making a significant effort to ensure that we are consistent with this administration's focus on righting the wrongs of the past and ensuring people who have previously been denied access to the many government programs are now included. We want to make sure we're doing everything we can to advance equity as we distribute these funds by bringing more voices from groups underrepresented in STEM into our R&D programs and by reaching institutions who have historically been underserved by our programs. Now that I provided a little bit of context, what is a disadvantaged community? So a disadvantaged community itself, according to EO 14008, Tackling the Climate Crisis at Home and Abroad, is defined as those that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. And further, in line with EO 14008, the Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool called CJEST, which is an interactive map that uses data sets that are like indicators of burdens, and there are 8 categories: climate change, energy, health, housing, legacy pollution, transportation, water and wastewater, and workforce development. So CJEST defines a community as disadvantaged if they are in a census tract that meets the thresholds for at least one of those CJEST threshold categories of burden, or they are on land within the boundaries of federally recognized tribes. Then, in addition to that, a census tract that is completely surrounded by disadvantaged communities and is at or above the 50 percentile for low income is also considered disadvantaged. And all of this can be found on the CJEST website. Now, a related but slightly different term is underrepresented or underserved communities, and I'll use those interchangeably. Well, these terms come up when you think about that equity word, right? Equity under the Biden administration means the consistent and systematic treatment of all individuals in a fair, just, and impartial manner, including individuals who belong to communities that often have been denied such treatment. And there are 3 equity-related, there are many new equity-related executive orders, but there are 3 we're going to focus on. That's EO 13985, Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the federal government. That's EO 14020, Establishment of the White House Gender Policy Council. And EO 14091, Further Advancing Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the federal government. Sort of like puts an exclamation point on EO 13985. So the term underrepresented or underserved communities were born from these executive orders. So when you're looking to define what an underrepresented community is, you need to know that it is context dependent and should be considered relative to the relevant communities, the workforces, and the locations. Underrepresented or underserved communities refers to populations sharing a particular characteristic as well as geographic communities that have been systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life. And here are some examples. Well, I'm going to give you the whole list. Black, Latino, Indigenous and Native American, Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander persons and other persons of color, members of religious minorities, women and girls, LGBTQI plus persons, persons with disabilities, persons who live in rural areas, persons who live in United States territories, and persons otherwise adversely affected by persistent poverty or inequality. And lastly, individuals who belong to multiple communities, right, of those communities. I'm going to close with this. Let me say that the Office of Nuclear Energy is taking steps to target the significant barriers still faced by these underserved and disadvantaged communities by integrating equity into our planning and decision making. And that includes these 2 FOIAs that we're on this call for today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. All right. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide, which is kind of touching in and kind of transitioning back into what is the RSNO, or the Reactor Sharing and Outreach purpose. And it is to encourage universities with reactors to share their resources with other educational institutions. And as I mentioned before, other universities, colleges, K through 12, vocational schools, and community colleges are some examples. How would you share those? So some examples might include some lab courses or nuclear workshops, or some physics experiments you can show with those facilities. Tours for students would be another one, across the various age ranges and educational levels. And finally, a big portion of this is that we want public engagements to be an important aspect of this funding opportunity. And we really need to advocate for nuclear science, engineering, and technology outside of the in the general public as it is. Even though the headwinds have been turning towards our direction, which is good, we want to encourage that some more. So eligibility and the format for these applications. The award size will be up to $200,000, and we are anticipating making up to 5 awards. The cost sharing is encouraged but not required. The period of performance will be for 2 years, and from an eligibility standpoint, the lead institution we're kind of restricting that to the 24 universities with a reactor on campus. We do encourage. Obviously, we encourage to partner with other institutions, and each lead institution can only submit 1 application at a time. And awardees in the next, when you are selected, can only hold an award for only hold 1 award at a time. Okay. The review process. So applications are limited to 8 pages. There are 3 primary review criteria with a bonus criteria. Impact, it has the largest component, which incorporates the objectives of the funding opportunity. The execution and utilization round out the other 50%, which is looking at the kind of planning and the teaming aspects of the application. And then finally, we also have the bonus, which is a diverse team consideration, and that's up to 3% for significant considerations of participation of MSIs, including HBCUs or TCUs. And with that, I will conclude this portion of the webinar with the reactor sharing component, and we'll hold questions to the end. But I will now transition into infrastructure revitalization. Okay. So the infrastructure revitalization FOA is intended to provide a holistic approach to infrastructure investments and R&D capabilities through a consortia-style model that combines physical infrastructure investments with training, student support, and research. So this FOA directly addresses the 2024 fiscal congressional budget language on revitalization of nuclear research infrastructure, specifically targeting 3 areas. So nuclear cyber physical protection, new digital technologies, and the development and safety assessments of small modular reactors. And please note that this funding opportunity does not include planning or construction of new university reactors. That's in the FOA, and it should be noted. So the purpose of this FOA, as I alluded to, is to focus on projects to add to the current U.S. capacity for advanced reactor R&D, education, and workforce development through a consortia-style model. And the projects are intended to revitalize our university-led R&D that will align with industry, support innovative combinations of facilities, equipments, and capabilities to maximize the value of investments towards R&D, and emphasize a rapid and low-cost approach that can be, or approaches that can enable advanced reactor R&D, education, workforce development, before any advanced research reactors are established at a university. And finally, the big portion of this is we want to involve a consortia among different types of institutions to maximize participation and benefits by underrepresented communities that have faced historical challenges to this kind of access. And I would also like to reiterate here again that we are not considering new research reactors as part of this application or this funding opportunity. Okay. So format and eligibility, similar to reactor sharing and outreach. We are targeting, what's a little different here is we are targeting a single award of up to $6 million. Cost sharing is encouraged but not required. The period of performance can be up to 4 years. It is open to all U.S. colleges and universities, but it does require a multi-institutional consortium. And at least 50% of the funds must be used for physical infrastructure, and each non-university collaborator in composite can have no more than 20% of the overall budget requested. Cost sharing, as I mentioned, encouraged but not required. So the full applications, they are much longer than the other types of infrastructure funding opportunities that the reactor upgrades and general scientific. Is that this is going to be a 25-page limits, and quotes are required for equipment exceeding $5,000. There are three merit review criteria there that are sort of evenly distributed. There's merit, execution, and utilization. Merit of the project focuses heavily on the revitalization of infrastructure as well as the incorporation of underrepresented communities. Execution and utilization or make up the remaining portions, also focusing on approach, teaming, and risk management. And then there's also, similar to the reactor sharing and outreach, there's a bonus point opportunity of up to 3% for any significant diverse teaming combinations. Okay. So we are nearing the end here, so I'm going to kind of go over the schedule over the next few months. The FOA was released last week. Today is the webinar. Applications are due on Valentine's Day of 2024, so February 14th. The award announcements will be in May with the anticipated award start date of August 1st. All right, so contact information. Technical questions can be submitted to the neup@inl.gov. And Andrew Ford, who his email is also included there, is the DoD ID contract specialist who will answer procurement questions. And the address below is for Q&A, so that at the bottom there is for Q&A section for this infrastructure, for both these infrastructure funding opportunities. And with that, we can start the Q&A session now. Okay.
And Andrew, thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Denise. We will open up questions, like I said, by chat. Or if you would like to ask a question, please use the raise your hand function in the Teams meeting. If you're not familiar with Teams, that is at the top. There's a hand that says raise. You just click on that button, and we will open the mic up to you so that you can ask a question to Andrew or to others here on these two opportunities.
Perfect. The first question in the chat, can you comment on if there are any preferred reactor types, for example, sodium cooled, gas cooled, SMR for the infrastructure FOA?
We don't have any preferred reactor types based on the funding opportunity, but I would recommend you review the DOE missions and the current, I guess, awards that are out there to make an assessment as to what the direction you want it to go in.
Next question is asking for clarity by SMR. Does it include LWR SMRs?
Similar to kind of what I said before, I would say that it would be all encompassing based on the language we were working with from the congressional budget. So it is possible that you could consider LWRs, but also you want to take a look at what awards have gone out recently and make an assessment from there.
Perfect. Thank you, Andrew. Next question is the expectation that the 50% plus of physical infrastructure would be concentrated at one lead university or spread across all consortium partners?
That is dependent. It could be in both. My understanding is that it could be in both scenarios. You could have it at one university or you can have it spread across. The idea would be preferably, I mean, there is no preference. It's how you want to write your proposal in that case. And maybe Drew has a comment on that.
Yeah. Andrew, maybe the perspective I have there is it really is dependent on what type of infrastructure you're looking at, right? There are appropriate large facilities that would need to be located in one location where consortia partners would come. There's others that could be more distributed, and so we're intentionally vague on that aspect so that it doesn't unnecessarily limit a piece of infrastructure that DOE hasn't considered but would be very relevant to the mission and to nuclear energy research in the university environment.
Awesome. Thank you. Continuing on those lines, the next question for infrastructure, the required 50% or more of the funding on equipment, is that applicable to just the federal funds? Or if we are contributing cost share, is that calculated as well?
You want me to take this one?
Yeah, if you don't mind, maybe have a better understanding of that.
I would say that it's 50% of the federal funds. That's how it's written in the funding opportunity, at least the way that I understand it.
Thanks, Drew. Another one along that 50-50 split. The next question is how the 50-50 split is done on the budget. The total for the whole team must be in 50-50 split, or each co-PI portion must have their budget satisfying the 50-50 split.
For that one, I would say the overall budget needs to be a 50-50 split. So there are situations where maybe a lead institution would place a major piece of equipment for 50% of the budget. That would mean that the co-PIs or the collaborators would primarily be doing research instead of infrastructure investments in those spaces, and that would be a fine way to do things, as long as the overall budget is 50-50.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Awesome. Next question. Are the funds mainly used to buy equipment or for research? What is the balance supposed to be for that?
So I think I can take that one. The intention is more for bringing back the infrastructure for nuclear R&D from the university perspective. So it could be, the intention is to come up with a way of, the way I like to think about it is build it and they will come. I think that's a unique way of saying it. But that being said, if you have an intention to use it, we're leaving it vague for a reason, to see what kind of proposals come in and how we can address that in terms of how strong those proposals can be. If you're just purchasing stuff just to have it, I mean, that would depend on how we would want to do that kind of review and that sort of thing. The intention, I believe, though, is to revitalize R&D and revitalize the capabilities. So you can make the extrapolation that it is potentially research biased in a sense.
If I could add to that,
Yeah.
I would say that it's really dependent. There may be a large piece of equipment that, that requires more than 50% of that budget. It's really on a case by case basis. And so the balance, we're really looking to all of you to provide justification for the balance that you come to a conclusion for. The idea is to meet those objectives of having infrastructure that you can actually use, and the idea of the consortia is being able to have the infrastructure and then be able to use it within the time period that the project is open and available.
Thank you. Next question. When the call says revitalization, is there an implication of using the fund's already existing infrastructure and upgrading / repurposing it?
So that could be that could be one way. But the ideal when we say revitalization is from a holistic standpoint. So for revitalizing the R&D aspects of looking at it from the countrywide perspective, it can also be coming up with potentially new capabilities as well. But if you have an existing system that is looking to be upgraded, that is also potentially an opportunity to write to. I don't know if Drew has any more to add to that.
I think you put it well. If you do have equipment that can be enhanced, of course, that fits. If you have a new capability that would really add to the overall research capabilities, in a significant way, that's why it's open. With the exception of a new reactor build, which is a space that's not currently open as part of this funding opportunity.
Awesome, thank you. The next question is, will the attendees receive a copy of the slides that were presented today?
To be clear, on the neup.gov website, before the holiday break, meaning before the end of next week, we will have a copy of this webinar, a copy of the slides, and a copy of the question and answers that came through for everyone to utilize while they're preparing their applications.
Some thanks, Drew. The next question is if we could just back up a couple of slides to the expected number of awards and award size for the reactor sharing. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And then after that, the question is, can the funds be used to upgrade an existing facility?
That is, if we're talking about revitalization, the intention is you could. That is a possibility. It would depend on the application as well. When we say revitalize, it's a holistic kind of viewpoint from the U.S. I think I answered that. So. Yep.
We'll detail onto the reactor sharing question. Up to $200,000, up to 5 awards is the plan. Maybe one question that we've already gotten that I'd like to emphasize is that is $200,000 over the 2 years of the project and can be split in whatever way is most appropriate.
Perfect. Thank you. The next question. This reactor sharing program appears to have a larger expected award size and fewer awards than the program that existed in the earlier 2000s. Is this based on an intentional aim?
I can take part of this. And
go ahead, Andrew,
yeah.
And maybe I can add to what you're going to say.
Sure. So we're limited based on how much we're appropriated for these types of funding opportunities. The number of awards, we set aside about a million, not set aside, we're appropriate about $1 million for this kind of effort. And the breakdown turned out to be based on some rough ideas about 2 years. 100K per year was the original thought process. And then it ended up being about 5 awards. So, And maybe Drew, do you have more to add to that?
Yeah, what I would say is that the larger amount of funds was intentional, and that was, we took some feedback on what was good and what was lacking in the previous program, and I think the dollar amount is much larger so that something more impactful can be done. So, it's not just to support public visits or offset some of those costs. It's really, how do you really develop the reactor outreach and the reactor as a resource for students, a resource for the general public, a resource in the K through 12 space. And so we want to provide enough funding that that a university could realistically make a significant effort in that space over that 2-year period. We recognize that means that there's less awards, meaning that, if this program continues and is successful, there'll be about 10 active awards out of the 24 reactors at any given time. That's based on the funding and the objectives. That's a decision that we made. And, as always, I think everyone knows on the call here, DOE is always interested in feedback on how these programs are going and about making adjustments if the funding isn't enough, too large, other things, understanding there are funding constraints in each of these areas.
Awesome. Thank you. The next question, what is the expectation of the roles of the industry/lab partners in this consortia? For example, advising on how to purpose our labs to align with the industry needs, helping us with R&D. I assume most of the equipment should be used in the colleges, not the labs and industry.
That's kind of the direction I was thinking, is that the intention is to direct more towards the university side of things. Maybe Drew, do you have some other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think the sentiment, the assumption that it would be that the equipment would be placed at colleges or universities, absolutely true. I think the idea, with the comment and the presentation and the statement in the FOA is, thinking of that university resource and that consortia, as Andrew said, from a holistic and a national perspective, right? And that will potentially involve key industry or key lab participation. But the intention is not to put something at an industry partner or at a lab, but to have a piece of infrastructure or multiple pieces of infrastructure that really enhance the university capability across the United States. And so I hope that clarifies the question. If you want to have a follow-up there, be happy to answer any follow-ups.
Perfect. Thank you. Next question. What is the expectation for these programs to become annual?
I can take it. Or you want to take it? I don't know.
Do you want to? Yeah, no, either way. I can just say, each funding opportunity that is announced on a yearly basis, there's never a guarantee that there or an expectation that they're going to become annual opportunities. So there may be, Andrew, you may have a little bit more perspective in those spaces. I think that each year the university program evaluates how effective their different aspects of their different programs are, takes input from the request for information that happens every April and May, and makes decisions based on federal funding allocations and DOE priorities in those spaces. So, I think there's a strong indication that these types of opportunities are recognized as a need in DOE, which is why these FOAs were put out. But from an annual perspective, I would think we'd be speculating at that point. My hope and desire is that we see some really good applications, good interest, good returns from a review and award standpoint, and that we can make some decisions based on those outcomes. Andrew, anything to add from a different perspective than that?
Yeah, it obviously the intention is it's a hope that to continue this every year, and like you said that we are limited on appropriations, and that is a big thing that you never know. There's no guarantee year over year, and I think that was just the one other thing I wanted to add at the end of this. So okay.
Thank you. For the 3 themes suggested for the infrastructure call, the expectation is to address all of them or just focus on a single one. Will other themes be encouraged as well?
Okay, I can take that one. So the general idea is that you could focus on all 3. You can focus on one. It's the preference to stay within what we were directed to by Congress is to focus on these 3. And you can do 1, you can do 3, you can do everything. And it really is vague in that sense. Those 3 items do come directly from the congressional budget. So there is some interpretation a little bit. So maybe Drew, you have some other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just maybe encourage everyone to, the effort here is to be able to directly tie to at least one of these. And I think all of you probably have the same question, which is these are all really broad. So how do you, and what I would encourage you to do is justify that direct tie in your application, because there are a lot of different things that you can do that affect digital technologies and advanced reactors that involve safety and safety assessments or development of small modular reactors or others that may be in the cyber, more cyber realm. And so the idea is, how do you directly tie to one of these and make that justification? I think that we recognize how open some of these areas are and would look for those justifications from all of you. All right, I think we have gotten through the questions in the chat. Am I right, Josh, in that? Okay. So we'll keep we'll stay here and stay open, but I just want to make sure that if you do have questions, that you put them either in the chat or feel free to raise your hand, and you can ask your question live as well.
We did just have a few more questions come in. The first one is, does the 50% include labor to install equipment?
So Drew, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, this is one that I'd like to get some budget clarifications from our DOE Idaho contract specialists, but I would say that when you think about infrastructure costs, think about how DOE administers the reactor upgrades and general scientific infrastructure funding opportunity. Costs that are included there include installation costs. Typically, and this is something that you'll need to, if you have a specific situation, please reach out and ask so that we can get a clarification for you before you submit. But they typically include the physical equipment, startup, whatever the startup costs from a vendor standpoint is to get the equipment installed and running. They do not cover overhead costs or operational or maintenance costs. And so it really depends on what kind of labor you're talking about. But from an install, that seems like something that would be something that we would accept generally as an infrastructure cost as part of our traditional infrastructure program. I will point out that our traditional infrastructure programs typically exclude buildings, HVAC, major modifications of buildings, unless they're directly tied to the installation of the equipment. And so that's something to keep in mind as you go as well.
Thanks, Drew. Next question. Lab FWPs don't break out funding easily for leads to identify the effort versus facility/equipment costs. Is there an easier way to show this 50-50 split to any UP with multiple collaborators?
So to be clear on this, the intention for revitalization is that the infrastructure is going to be situated at colleges and universities. So if there are a national laboratory FWPs that come through, I would expect those to be research effort, rather than necessarily, equipment costs per se. So that's maybe the first way I would answer that question. The second thing that I would encourage you to do is, in your budget justification, you do have the ability to break out those costs, and that's the appropriate place to break out anything that wouldn't be appropriately attributed in a field work proposal. I would encourage you to do that in your lead budget justification form. All right, we have about 5 minutes left here. We'll do a last call for questions. Please feel free to raise your hand or toss any final questions into the chat. While we're waiting on final questions, I just want to remind everybody, Andrew has the contact information slide here. Please do reach out to NEUP@inl.gov for any of your questions. We can coordinate a variety of different questions, both on interpretation of the funding opportunity, procurement or budget questions, or more technically related questions. So feel free to reach out there, or to Andrew Ford directly on any procurement specific questions. Josh, any other questions before we wrap up? There aren't any other questions. Okay. Like I said before we all leave on holiday break, you should see the slides, video recording of this meeting, and an associated Q&A document that will be produced. We would like to thank Andrew, thank Denise for presenting here and informing us about the opportunities. If you do have any questions, please do feel free to reach out before the Valentine's Day deadline. And with that, we'll wrap it up. Thank you, everybody, for attending.